play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Pick and roll. And a foul, offensive foul coming up. Ken Valentine standing right there.
Izzo dying for a moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. It is Monday, August 12th. We are just ripping through the pods through the summer months, undeterred by interest or lack thereof. Dylan, what's up, man?
Not too much. Ready to talk some hoops. I mean, what else are you gonna do in the middle of August?
Got recruiting pods. We got season preview pods. I would challenge anyone to find a podcast that is spending this much time talking about two basketball programs in August as this podcast is.
Well, we need it. What else are we here for?
Frankly, I think we should pose the challenge and tell other podcasts to maybe step their games up. Talk more hoops in August.
I mean, there's nothing else better to talk about, right?
Well, for any of you listening out there, let's go. Putting down the gauntlet. So, how you doing, man? Everything good over there?
Yeah, ready. So what are we getting into today? Talking a little Michigan State?
We're talking some Michigan State. At the top of the show, though, some lines of business to get through. First of all, I always do this at the end of the show, but we're going to do it at the front of the show, like a professional outlet that we are. If you like this podcast, if you support this podcast, the best way to show your listenership is by subscribing to Hoops, which is Dylan's brainchild, and I would say probably one of the best independent blog sites out there in the college basketball stratosphere. I'm not just saying that because he's my friend and podcast husband, but because he does great work. So check that out. The videos are amazing, and his breakdowns are great. The analytical stuff is top notch. So for you Michigan fans out there, you can't beat it. Make sure you subscribe and check out what he's doing over there. And then also subscribe to The Athletic. One subscription gets you everything. Michigan, Michigan State, all of our national pages, all of our national writers. We kind of have a stable of writers now that is all over the country, well over 200 men and women who I think do some of the finest sports writing that you'll find out there, including, starting today, Mr. Nick Baumgartner, great friend of the pod, great friend of mine, and Dylan alike, and very exciting time here that Nick is joining us on the Detroit page for The Athletic. Personally, obviously, I've known Nick a very long time. I think he's going to do just an absolute killer job. I'm calling him the Hammer. He's going to be our football hammer. He will touch on Michigan. He will touch on Michigan State. He will touch on the Lions. That's just starting out. That role, I imagine, will expand in time to him kind of having even a larger voice. But it won't be what it was when we worked together at M Live. But we will. We are in the works for creating a separate podcast. But the good news for all of you out there is that this podcast will go on undeterred, and it will remain intact, and we're going to keep doing what we do. And that includes under this new format of more centric episodes on Michigan and Michigan State, as opposed to cramming all this shit into one very long episode once a week. We're going to kind of do more quick hit stuff on both. How's that all sound to you, man?
That sounds good. And I do want to add, a couple people have reached out and said that they really enjoy the kind of Big Ten talk. And just because we're going to do separate pods on Michigan and Michigan State doesn't mean we're not going to still talk Big Ten hoops at large. So we'll still get into plenty of that stuff also. It just might be its own podcast or somewhere else. Yeah.
The goal is to give you guys more stuff that will kind of get you through the week, as opposed to just laying these monster hour, 20-minute ramble fests on you, right? Is that,
yep,
would those be classified as ramble fests?
I feel like our shorter pods might still end up as hour and 5-minute ramble fest, but what are you going to do?
It's fair. That's just because we're a little psychotic about this stuff, but that's what it is. So today, this is a Michigan State episode. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Tom Izzo for about 2.5 hours, 10 days or 2 weeks ago, something like that, prior to writing my state of the program for the Athletics college basketball page. I think they're doing like 70 programs over the course of the summer, which is crazy. But I was obviously assigned Michigan State. The Michigan edition will drop in like a week and a half or so. But yeah, we wanted to kind of get into both what was written there about Michigan State, but more so kind of go beyond what's in that story and talk about, share some extra anecdotes that Izzo told me, and then also kind of analyze, I think, what came out in that thing. We want to start first with what was the big question in that state of the program piece, and that is Josh Langford. Both his status at the start of the year and presuming he is 100% either early or at some point, what it actually looks like when he's in the lineup. And we touched on this in a previous podcast, and I brought it up to Tom Izzo, and we talked at length about it. But let's kind of recap first your thoughts on Langford, what the numbers tell you, and kind of how you would like to frame this part of the conversation.
So I think there's a couple things to tackle with Langford. There's the individual stuff about how his game fits, what makes him more and less efficient, but also the big question is just his health, right? I know that you said somewhere along there in the article that he's about a month behind kind of his recovery timetable. Is that right?
Yeah, so, I mean, the way that Tom put it was that basically, okay, it's an injury and he's not just going to come back after 6 months and be cool, but I think even that's fairly obvious, but beyond that, I think it is taking a little bit longer than folks there had anticipated, and they seem to be thinking like possibly closer to like Christmas. I think that's part of the like that might be. Oh wow, that might be possible. And I'm not saying playing necessarily, but maybe like actually being at 100%. It could be closer to Christmas than walking on the court against Kentucky at Madison Square Garden, being the same guy who played in the Champions Classic last year, right? So whether he's there day one is very much to be determined. I think it's going to be a huge talking point throughout the preseason, and this is kind of just the preface for it. But he has a way to go in his recovery. He did not play at all in Moneyball. He said he's still recovering, but is getting back on the court. So that's kind of where things stand. I'm not, when I say Christmas, I don't want people freaking out thinking that, oh my God, he's not going to play until Christmas. But I think it's going to be maybe a slow roll. And correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like once Langford got hurt last year, everyone just kind of, okay, we just pencil him in as the day one starter. Next year he'll be back healthy, no problem. I think it's just a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, and the way you describe him makes it sound a lot more complicated. I mean, depending on when he gets back and how healthy he is, because I assume it's kind of a fine line between when he can come back, but also how to get him back at his best when it matters most, right? Like, that's always a fine line when you're coming back from a long-term injury like that. And it's no secret that I've never been a fan of his shot selection, right? Basically, he loves mid-range twos. I know you had a good stat in your article about that. But what's really fascinating to me about Langford is he's really, really good at making threes. He's a 40% career three-point shooter. I don't think that the idea is, I know there was a quote in there like, Langford's not going to come back and be a volume shooter, right? Is it something like that?
Let's read this quote. I think this is important because I literally brought up what we talked about on the podcast, and he said, this is the exact quote from Tom Izzo. I don't think he'll be a volume shooter. I just don't think so. With him sitting out and what he's gone through, I think he's got a different perspective on things. He's heard a lot. He's seen a lot. I think he understands that he has to get better with the ball.
So that to me can mean a lot of different. Like Langford doesn't need to take fewer shots per se. He needs to change the distribution of the shots that he takes. A Langford that it's not that you need to not take long twos. It's that you need to take them from 5 feet back so they're threes. So that's the first part that I thought was kind of interesting about that. It's not that, and part of that could be that if he takes fewer shots, that ratio can naturally correct. But if he's still taking 40%, 30% of his shots as long twos, he's not going to really improve his efficiency. It sounds like they're looking for him to be more aggressive, kind of get into the basket. He talked about improving his handle there at the end of that quote, and that definitely could help. But I think you could also pitch a situation where maybe it's more a Matt McQuaid role in the offense where he just doesn't have the ball in his hands as much and can only shoot threes more, right? It's a fine line of how you figure out the best situation for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just being a more aggressive overall player, less settling for some of those shots. And you're right, maybe it does get, I think 15% of his shots came at the rim last year. Like, that's what Hoop Math had. Even if you're going to the rim, you're naturally going to take a couple more shots at the rim. But you're also going to create different wrinkles into the offense if suddenly you're kind of getting the ball into the basket. Now, he can kick out, right? I mean, he's just not... I don't think he's ever going to be a natural facilitator, but it's just by not taking that shot, by just doing something else with the ball.
So in your
changes things.
Final season, after missing the entire offseason with an injury, while you're still getting back to 100%, you're going to add that to your game?
I don't know. We'll see.
Right? Like, that's tough.
But, like, is he an elite ball handler? Absolutely not. Is he a guy who naturally is fast enough to beat guys off the bounce? No. But is he smart enough, crafty enough, relatively quick enough to do more stuff there? Yeah. Then take the 18-foot pull-up? He is. And when Tom said that he learned a lot watching the game last year, I know this is like the cliche anytime anyone ever sits out, is that they've magically rediscovered what the sport looks like by watching it instead of playing it. I do think Josh is beyond smart enough to understand efficiency stats and understand when he watches the game how much different the half-court offense can look when he's not in it.
Yeah, so do you think the pressure, though, on him to try to do more with the ball just leads to more of those long twos?
It could. I think that's the problem, that we can sit here and talk till we're blue in the face about it, but like until he gets on the court, because you're right. I think in terms of Michigan State reaching its ceiling, they're probably just best off just him taking the shots that Matt McQuaid took, right? And that's as a three-point
or more of them even. As a distribution.
Yeah, as a three-point shooter, he was basically the same thing. It's not like he's not the three-point shooter that Cassius Winston is, in that they take different shots. So here's a couple numbers. Again, these are from Hoop Math. But so Winston, 53 of his 84 threes were unassisted, right? He's a guy who has the ball in his hands. He creates his own looks. He shoots in transition, blah, blah, blah. Matt McQuaid, 70 of his 73 made threes were assisted. He's coming off screens. He's planting his feet. He's taking good looks. Langford's the same thing. Before he was injured, 28 of his 29 made threes were assisted. Those are shots that probably, if you run the tape, are basically the same exact sets that Matt McQuaid was working off of.
Exactly. And there was sort of just an understanding that Matt McQuaid wasn't going to be pressured to try to do more with the ball. Right. I just remember a game at the Big Ten tournament where Izzo was just screaming at him after he missed some wild driving attempt, just like, you don't have that, Matt. So, like, it was just understood.
Right.
There's like a pressure more on Langford to be more than that, but every possession that you use Josh Langford as a facilitator or try to improve his facilitating, you're going to take it away from Cassius Winston, who's the best in the country at that.
Agreed.
So I just wonder if there's a way it might be better for him health-wise. It might be better for Michigan State as an offense. And again, this Michigan State's offense was elite of the elite last year, but a lot of that also came after Langford was hurt. It's not like the offense is suddenly going to be terrible if Langford is involved in doing things. But if Langford could cut out some of the empty calories in his shot selection that you don't really need, right? Like, a lot of times you talk about shot selection, you're like, oh, mid-range twos are terrible. There is definitely a time and place you have to take and make mid-range twos.
And he has it. He has that shot.
One of the biggest things that Cassius Winston improved on last year was that he added a floater to his game, and he had that mid-range kind of game to use late in the clock. Langford takes a lot of transition mid-range twos, step-in mid-range twos in the first 50% of the shot clock. Those are the ones that you need to cut out. Obviously, late in the clock, like, it just gets people simplify it to so black and white where, oh, that's inefficient, and your whole argument is wrong because maybe you could be – there's a time and place for mid-range twos. There is. Right. It's just if Langford can cut down on that ratio, he could be really improved even if maybe he's not physically 100% even, right? It's just a really fine line.
Yeah, and that's – I mean, that was part of the conversation with Izzo is, you know, when I'm making this point, he goes, you know, but he has a mid-range game. Like, he has a mid-range game. It's there. He's comfortable with it. That's part of who he is. And I was like, and that's true. But the difference is that, like, those little, he gets a guy on his back, right? 12, 13 feet from the basket and has that little drop step kind of spinner mid-range shot. Like, yes, that is nice. And he knows that and Langford knows the pro scouts like that. That's a shot NBA scouts like to see. That's quote unquote a mid-range jumper. Also quote unquote a mid-range jumper is stepping in and taking the 19, 18 footer, just a bad long two. And he agrees with that. And he's like, that thing has to be eliminated from his game. But the thing is that we were having the same conversation last year, going into last year. And he still took a lot of those shots. So some of it is almost like kind of reordering his DNA a little bit. And, you know, I mean, your instincts are your instincts. And if that's just how he's always played, and it's only going to be, it could only be more exasperated by the 3-point line moving out an extra foot or two, that like his spatial awareness needs to be really high level to not be taking just possession killer shots.
Yep, I didn't even think really about the 3-point line and the impact that might have, especially kind of in those transition situations where he almost seems to just drift kind of inside the 3-point line when he's running the wing like that. That could be an issue. Just Langford has taken not quite twice as many twos as threes, but he's a 48% 2-point shooter for his career and a 41% 3-point shooter.
So what's the points per shot on that?
Well, I'm not going to do that on the fly, but it's like 0.9 on twos and 1.2 on threes, right? So that's a big difference. And as a guy what really stood out was that stat you had about how few shots he actually took at the rim, despite taking that many twos. Mm-hmm. So if you could just separate those mid-range twos into more rim shots and more 3-point shots, all of a sudden he's going to be one of the most efficient players in the Big Ten, because guys that shoot 40% from 3-point range are super efficient basically all the time. That should be a staple of his game.
For sure. And he's a really good free throw shooter. He's like almost an 85% free throw shooter, I think. But like, he took, how many games did he end up playing last year?
13.
He took 31 free throws a game, or 31 free throws total. Like, if you are if you are going to the rim, right, you can get that number up. Like, there's just so many ways for him to be. And he's really good. I mean, like, I don't think this should just sound like us bashing on Josh Langford. I mean, Josh Langford's a high-level basketball player. And the reason we focus on him like this is because of how talented he is. And that it's just like, sometimes you're watching him, you're just dying for him to be everything that he could be. And I do think there's a really good chance that he does get there this year, as long as he's healthy, as long as he trusts his legs and his game. It's going to be. I think he's going to be processing a lot all at once. So it will be really interesting to see him navigate the first half of the year, because I think Rocket Watts is going to be nipping at those heels. And let's kind of morph this into some style. We're not going to go through every player, because we're going to do that a million times in the preseason, whatever. We want to talk more about style of play and rotation, the things that came out in that regard from the conversation with Izzo and the story. So let's put it this way. When I asked Tom, what are your big questions of the season? It was Langford's health, rotation minutes at the 4, and does Rocket Watts pick up on things quickly enough to get in and be the player that he might be able to be as a freshman? That's pretty serious classification, I feel like, for Watts. And it actually kind of gave me pause where I was like, maybe I was overlooking him in terms of impact this year. But with this Langford situation being what it is, who else plays the 2?
It's a great question. And, I mean, Watts is also one of the most talented freshmen coming into the Big Ten, right?
Yes.
Like, you think of him as kind of a lead guard, and you're like, well, Cassius Winston's here. Maybe he has to wait his turn. But Cassius Winston had to do all of the playmaking on that Michigan State roster last year. And Watts is going to have to, I think he's the best option to kind of allow some of that freedom or pressure to come off of Winston, right? Who else on this roster for Michigan State is going to go and make their own shot or create their own shot? I don't really see, as we just said, I don't think Langford's that guy. Maybe Aaron Henry grows into that a bit more, but there's not really a natural playmaking guard on the roster other than Watts, is there?
No,
other than Watts and Winston, obviously.
And when he was praising Rocket, 2 of the things that he said that really jumped out. When we talk about him, you think first about scoring, shooting, quickness, athleticism, right? When he was talking about Watts, he said the things that are sticking out to him the most are unselfishness. And this is a guy who took 15 threes or made 15 threes in a game, which means he probably took about 25 or 30. His unselfishness and his versatility and upside on defense, because he's a really good athlete that he could be a great perimeter defender, if he's really locked in on things. So if those are the things that are already the upside in Izzo's eyes, we know the rest about his talent level.
Best way to become a more unselfish basketball player, play with a Ball brother for a year. Probably works every time.
Well, and also kind of, walk into a program that is firmly in the hands of Cassius Winston. Like if Rocket Watts wants to go out there firing bad shots when you have the best point guard in the country on your team, the minutes won't be there. It's just not. It's not going to be. It'll be short lived for him. So smart enough to know that, and I mean, look, if he's the option at the 2, especially early on, you have to realize that you might have Rocket Watts playing serious minutes against Kentucky at Madison Square Garden, against Duke at Breslin, 3 games in Maui, on the road at Seton Hall. Like, this will be walking right into the flames, and I think, really, that in the long run, it will help them immensely, just in terms of depth at the end of season. Just because if Josh Langford were 100%, now you'd be charged with getting him in there, knocking off the rust, having him play those games and things like that, right? You put Watts in there, you're more likely to have a very legit game-ready guy come Big Ten season, come the postseason too.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off of Langford for sure, and it kind of allows you to ease Langford back into things without him feeling that pressure. I'm trying to think of a Michigan State situation that was more similar to this, but kind of reminds me of Derek Walton as a freshman, where you're the freshman, you have guys who have been on an NCAA tournament run, won a bunch of games. They're going to do all the playmaking. They're going to kind of carry the load in that regard. Like I'm talking about because that team had Stauskas and LeVert, right?
Right.
And then you just have to be a guy, and you just have to make shots, make plays. You're not going to be asked to do everything. You have veterans next to you, right? You have Xavier Tillman in the front court. You have Aaron Henry on the wing. You have Winston in the backcourt, right? It's a really good situation for a talented freshman to be in, I think. Can you think of a Michigan State example similar to that?
I can't, but I don't really have the institutional. I mean, look, My Michigan knowledge goes back to 2013-14. My Michigan State knowledge basically goes back to 2015-16. So I am happy to admit that is the case. Two more things to touch on here in this part of it. With Watts, I do think it'd be really interesting, if he is playing serious minutes at the 2, that whole conversation that we just had about the shots that Matt McQuaid took and the shots that Joshua Langford should take. That's they're a little bit more interesting with Watts in there.
Watts isn't taking those same shots,
exactly.
I don't think.
Now suddenly you kind of have two guys who want to attack, want to play out of ball screens. It's basically 2 point guards, for lack of a better term. That changes things in terms of what they have to be drawing up. And that would be a very interesting situation in terms of what the offense looks like early on and how it would need to evolve with Langford working his way into, a primary rotation piece.
Yeah, so I guess the two things to think about are, will Watts space the floor well enough off the ball when he's with Winston? But also another guy who can play with the ball gets to use Winston as a floor spacer, because Winston is just such an elite three-point shooter that you can play him off the ball more and really get to that. The question, I guess, would be if Watts struggles to shoot from 3, Henry, we don't really know what he is as a three-point shooter. We don't know who's going to play the 4. You might lack some of that reliable floor spacing that you got from McQuaid and Goins last year.
And if you think
those are the two questions.
You think about it into last year, there were times where they really, really wanted to be able to trust and rely on Foster Lawyer to play some 1 so that they could give Cassius Winston a little bit of time at the 2. Both because you almost get a little bit of in-game rest that, in theory, I guess some people believe that. I don't really buy that too much, but more so to be able to use his shooting, right? Now, you let him work off the ball, get different shots as opposed to being the primary guy. Well, if it's Watts out there, you would think now you would get that at times when you want it. It's an option. It's certainly more of an option than having, hopes and prayers for Foster Lawyer as a freshman. So the other part, what was the other part? I should have written this down. Shit. I had another point on Watts stepping in.
I think his defense is something you hit on where that complements Winston really well. Where I think Izzo's quote was they want Winston to be at least a serviceable defender, something along those lines.
Yeah.
If you have Watts as a guy who's a plus defender, plus athlete, that can hide some of the pressure on Winston to be a great defender.
For sure.
If you put them on their court next to each other. Whereas Langford, given his health, we're not really sure where he'll be at defensively. Obviously, he's got experience and he's been regarded as a good defender, but health could play an issue there.
Yeah. Okay, let's go into... You want to talk about the 4?
I think the 4 is the most
interesting
thing really here. And I was really surprised that kind of the first name that Izzo mentioned to you as a potential starter at the 4.
Yeah, for sure. The crazy thing about the 4 position is that you could literally sit here and list 6 guys, maybe even 7, who could play minutes at the 4 next year. All right, so Kyle Arns, Xavier Tillman can play some 4 and will play some 4 at times. Thomas Kithier, same thing. Those two might play together, so they're kind of interchangeable at times, and you will see that look. Gabe Brown can play some 4. Marcus Bingham can play some 4. Aaron Henry can play some 4. Malik Hall as well. Then you have Julius Marble, who, based on the conversation, seems like he'll be either a redshirt option or probably play sparingly. I think he probably has the furthest of all those names. He probably has the furthest to go to crack rotation. And then, of course, wild card Joey Hauser is on the roster. He would be the starting 4 tomorrow if he were eligible, barring something coming from NCAA. Who knows ever?
You keep throwing that out there,
dude. At all times, any eligibility as possible for freshmen, for transfers.
I'm just seeing if there's something more there.
No. So if there is, how many names did I say there? 1, 2,
more
3,
than 5,
4, 5, 6, 7. That's 8. Those are 8 names that I rattled off for one position. So yeah, it's for sure the most interesting question on the team, topic of conversation. So for Izzo to come out, I was surprised with him to saying that if they started today, it would probably be Malik Hall. He said Malik Hall or Kithier, but it was more so Hall.
That I was shocked that the answer wasn't just Kithier, just based on experience and the fact that we saw him play with Tillman quite a bit last year.
Yep. He likes him. He likes him a lot. So let's get into Malik Hall. The thing is that I think he is the closest proxy to Kenny Goins right now.
Interesting.
In terms of the way that they play. Now I'm talking Kenny at the end of last year, not career Kenny. This is, Hall is 6'8", 215, really good 3-point shooter, kind of a hybrid 3 or 4. His defense will kind of be part of the reason that he plays, because he can guard multiple positions. He gives them multiple screening options. I think last year when Xavier Tillman really came into his own and took over those primary minutes at the 5, and Kenny Goins is as reliable as he was, and they were able to switch 1 through 5 and do different things like that. That was a major pivot point in the season, and it's something they want to be able to replicate as much as possible. And if that is going to be Hall, if he can shoot threes and give them those options defensively, sign them up. I think they're ready to go.
Seems a little bit like, would this be fair, Aaron Henry 2.0 almost?
Yeah,
similar,
a little taller.
Sort of style, a little bigger.
He can guard the post probably a little bit more.
Switchable, athletic defender. Mm-hmm. You have those two guys on the wing. That's going to be a pretty solid, and Xavier Tillman at the 5. That's a pretty solid kind of defensive core right there.
Yeah.
In terms of length, strength, athleticism, switchability, all that.
Yeah, and when there's switches on him, he is a guy who not only can hit threes, but feels really comfortable posting a smaller guard who might get switched onto him. He's comfortable with the ball in his hands. He can set a screen and make a pass. I think he's a pretty cerebral guy in the half court. I just think I think he gives them the most positive options early. That's why they like him so much.
So here's where I'm stuck at with kind of all. So we just are sitting here talking about a Michigan State team who's number 1 because they return so much. We're talking about freshmen starting at the 2 and the 4, replacing probably the 2 most boring, underappreciated, but important 2 and 4 in the country.
Sure.
Like really?
Yeah, no, it's major. It's
sometimes
major
you wonder, like, you see these freshmen come in and they're always like the shiny new thing. But sometimes you just have a car, the old rusty Civic, but you know where you're going. It can still be a better option. And
that is why I think there's a very good chance that you could see the first 2 weeks of the season go by, and suddenly Kyle Arnes is starting at the 4, right, going into the Duke game. Because here's a great anecdote from my conversation with Tom. He says he asked me, how many minutes do you think Kyle Arnes played a game last year? So I'll ask you, how much do you think?
12.
Okay, this is very interesting. So I said 20. Tom says that internally they had a conversation. They were looking at film and the stats from last year, and Tom asked the staff, how many minutes a game do you think Kyle Arnes played last year? And they all said 12. The answer is 19. He was a guy who was just out there. And you know why? Because Izzo puts him in when somebody would screw up or do something they didn't like. He would put Arnes in. Arnes just does his job, right? It is nothing spectacular, but he just plays his balls off, attacks the offensive glass, he defends, he runs his ass off up and down the floor on transition both ways. And you almost forget he's out there, and it's because he's not doing anything that makes you rip your hair out of your head. So he would just stay in the game. They wouldn't take him out because he was just doing his job. So he played almost 20 minutes a game, and that's why. And I think there's a very good chance for all of those guys that we listed off, including 2 potential NBA prospects in Bingham and Brown, Kyle Arnes could end up playing 20 minutes a game, if not more, this year, and a lot of it coming as an undersized 4-man.
Because he's the trusted, boring option.
Exactly. He's the rusty
If he makes
Civic.
threes, he's the rusty Civic with a map. He knows where to go.
Yep.
These other guys might have all the talent in the world, but if you can't figure out where to go as a freshman, you can't be on the floor. And that's the good news for Michigan State is that you've got both.
Yeah.
You have Kyle Arnes sitting there in the garage, and if you need him, you can always go back and drive him to work on Monday.
Yep.
I
love that this metaphor is just going to keep on going. What's
I'm
Gabe
curious,
Brown?
I'm curious, though, like, how that all plays out, right? Yeah. How it's a fine line because, like, you kind of bring Aaron Henry along all year last year, and then he really breaks out in the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. These new options can really elevate Michigan State's ceiling, but there might be short-term losses or slower progress early in the season at some point, right?
Well, I think they'll all get their chances. I mean, I think of all the whole group I just said, Bingham's probably the biggest project, I think, in terms of seeing the floor right now. But I also think Aaron Henry's versatility can give some of these other guys a tunnel to get through, to actually get on the floor, because Henry's going to see some time at the 4. They like his ability to post up. He can guard other 4s. He can switch on everything. I think I had another hoop math number on him. 40% of his shots were at the rim, right? 42 of 120. You know, he gets he gets down there and he can play at the basket. That 42 of 120 number is wrong, but 40% of his shots were at the rim. So by him playing some 4, I think you can have Gabe Brown at the 3 alongside Henry, right? And vice versa. You could have Brown at the 4 and Henry at the 3. But I think that they would trust the opposite more.
Yeah, here's the thing. You have Cassius Winston, Aaron Henry, Xavier Tillman.
Right.
All top whatever players at their position in the league, say.
They're all 3 are top 10 players in the league. Maybe top 8.
Okay. So you have to fill in 2 spots, and you can shift Henry in either direction. Tillman, you can shift down to the 4. Winston's so good that you can really put anyone next to him. So you have everyone else on the roster to just fill out 90 minutes between 2 spots and a few backup minutes, right?
Sure.
I mean, and to have this many, we're going through all these options, and who knows, maybe like anyone can really emerge in these spots, and that's a great position to be in as far as roster flexibility, and that's what really makes Michigan State so dangerous, that there's so many different options. And you look at the sophomore class, I feel like has almost become the forgotten option, right? Your Gabe Brown, your Bingham, like these guys are top 100 recruits who didn't get a lot of burn last year, but are guys who should be expected to break out at some point, and you usually see that coming into your sophomore year, right?
For sure, and you have to imagine that those guys are thinking that, and their families are thinking that, and the people around them are thinking that, right? And that's when, there's going to be a lot of that, I have to feel like, of how many minutes are going to who and how they react to that. So, Marcus Bingham, I mean, you had the great stat. He didn't make a 2-point shot last year. He only took 4 shots at the basket last year. Like, he's not, for all of his length, yes, he's a shot blocker, but he still gets lost on defense. Ball screen defense is an issue. Setting screens is a huge issue. Like, these are things that this team is so good that there isn't a need to put him out there and wade through the development. I think if you put a gun to Tom Izzo's head and it was a perfect world, he redshirts Marcus Bingham this year. But how reasonable is that in 2019 to ask a sophomore with, who's been told for 2 years that he's an NBA prospect that he's redshirting? That's not.
I also think that Izzo does a really good job of integrating guys early in the season and sort of testing things out more in the non-conference. That was sort of one of the biggest downfalls, I would say, of Michigan's season last year is you had the easy option to fill in the spot with Ignas Brazdeikis, but by not bringing along other pieces throughout the season, you kind of lose sight of growing as a team over the year. But I think Izzo generally has used the non-conference pretty well to establish younger players, at least give them a chance. He's not afraid to put someone out there for 2 minutes, watch them screw up, yell at them, and then move on to the next possession. Langford's health could just make that even easier, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've definitely kind of come to understand a little bit more after covering the program for 3 years or whatever it's been. That early on in the season, I found each time I'm like, the rotation's too big. There's too many guys playing. How can you operate this way? But then little by little, over the course of the year, the rotation gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and suddenly, when you get to postseason, it looks like it should. And I mean, shit, he played 7 guys in the national semifinals last year, and Gabe Brown got 14 minutes, Nick Ward got 13 minutes off the bench. That was it. It was basically just run your horses, and that's pretty much the way it was for the last month of late. But that was also partially due to situation.
Injuries and such,
Kyle Lawrence would have seen at least 15 minutes in the national semifinals, especially once Aaron Henry picked up those 2 early fouls, but whatever. I want to talk a little bit about style of play.
Okay.
Because this is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of what we got into. And, Tom talked a lot about that we're going to see more kind of quick-hitting screens off the break. I think he wants to run more, but also run a little bit differently. They want better spacing. They want it to be very open in the half court. He's talked about running Carolina style and getting up 65 shots per game. I found that interesting because if you remember back to last year, Michigan State was flying up and down the court. They got up a ton of shots. They were like top 5 or 10 in the country in tempo. And gradually, I think as a result of finding a better style of play and the kind of evolution of Cassius Winston and ball screens and Kenny Goins becoming this pick and pop option, but then also injuries to Langford.
I think it's injuries in depth.
I think it was both.
You can't run like that when you have 7 guys playing.
I think it was both. I think they became extremely efficient with what they were doing in the half court, and just the bodies just dropping, and those 2 things dovetailed, and they were slow by the end of the year, by comparative stats like to the league and things like that. They finished the league, or they finished the season. Let's see, 8th in the league in tempo in conference-only games, about 66 possessions. Now he's talking about getting 65 shots up per game. So I think, yes, they can run better. At the same time, though, I feel like the other route to more shots, more tempo, whatever, is cutting back on turnovers, which has to happen, and we've been said for years and years at this point. But I think you're going to see even better offensive rebounding. I think you're going to see fewer turnovers, and they're going to run faster. And if those 3 boxes are checked, the number 1 ranked efficient offense in the country could be even more efficient. No?
I think that running comes down to bodies for Michigan State this year. I think it comes down to whether Cassius Winston, if Cassius Winston's playing 40 minutes per game, can you really be running at that sort of speed? I just think he gets exhausted.
He ain't playing. How many did you say? 40 minutes?
Well, that's basically what he was playing at the end of last year.
Sure.
And you can't have him busting his ass up and down the court and staying out of foul trouble, being efficient, doing his job on defense, doing literally everything for the offense in the half court and running at that sort of tempo. I think that's what it came down to, slowing down last year, where you just didn't have anyone else you could trust in the backcourt, and it was sort of this is what we've got, this is what we're going to do. I don't see why you can't play faster this year and still run all that stuff in the half court, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're still going to run all those ball screens, you're still going to do all that. I would expect that Michigan State's transition offense will improve simply because they'll be the more talented team most times they take the court, and the most talented Michigan State teams run their ass off. It's just kind of part of what they do.
Right. Well, and also, some of that's going to need to be, Xavier Tillman's going to have to up his game in the full court, getting up and down the floor. And he's a great physical presence and stuff like that, but he's going to need to. Part of the reason that they were so amazing in transition in the first half of the year last year is because Nick Ward went rim to rim as good as anybody in the country. Say what you will about Nick Ward, but he was at the highest level of getting down court and getting basically free money all year long. That's not something you just snap your fingers and replicate.
I agree. Tillman's transition numbers are good. Not quite as much volume as Ward, which I would think Tillman played more minutes than him last year overall.
He also played his bulk minutes when they played differently, though. Ward played his bulk minutes when they were going 10 deep and running guys up and down the court.
And Ward was just elite at beating his man down the court, sealing him, scoring. It was shocking how good he was at that, given what he looked like and how he ran in all other situations on the basketball court. But when he could get his ass down the court, catch, great hands, finish. That was just his bread and butter, and he excelled in that regard. Aaron Henry, though, is the guy who you look at, he could develop into kind of one of those terrors on the wing in transition for Michigan State that I don't know if he was quite aggressive or comfortable enough last year, but that's the guy who I think could really make the whole thing go. Just those kick-ahead passes to Henry on the wing, and he just goes and dunks on someone. That's what, when you have all those Malik Hall, just interchangeable forwards who can run and dunk, that's what you want to do. Just play all of them, 25 minutes a game, interchange, run up and down the court. And the pieces are there. I still worry about depth at the 1, depth at the 5. If you're going to have, if Simpson and Tillman, how many minutes are they going to play? Or, sorry, Winston and Tillman, how many minutes are they going to play? Right?
Oh, you're going to catch a mountain of shit for that. Yeah, right. No, you're totally right.
Are they 35-minute a game guys?
They shouldn't be in the first half of the year. They need to be, because they need to be in March.
So how fast can you play if your center and point guard are playing 35 minutes a game?
Cassius Winston won't be playing 35 minutes a game in November and December.
He's National Player of the Year. He's going to play. He's got to play.
I think he will. He's going to be playing 30, 32, I think, a game. Okay. Yeah, against Duke, does he play 35? Yes, probably. Kentucky, probably. All the other games, I think it's going to be 28 to 32 a game. When they're beating the piss at a EMU, Western, all these games. Yeah, but
in the Big Ten.
In the Big Ten, I think he's going to be playing 33 minutes a game.
How many minutes is he going to play Tuesday night at Rutgers in the Big Ten? You're going to end up going 37 in that game because it's going to be a pain in the ass, and he's the guy you trust.
Again, so that's the thing. This is why I said that if Watts is getting real minutes early, how huge it could be for later in the year. Because then maybe
Watts can fix all that.
You're a lot more confident giving him 7 minutes of run at point, assuming Langford's at the 2, right? That would be pretty huge. And Foster Lawyer's going to get a chance in the beginning of the year. He is. He's going to get a chance to get in there and run at least a few minutes a game. I don't think he's just not part of this equation. Now, what he does with it, who knows? But I do think they know the importance of. They just spent the entire summer trying to get Cassius Winston's legs stronger so that he can be healthier. I don't see them then just burning him out in November and December. They sat him for 6 weeks, right? Then they spent all this time strengthening his quads so that his knees are stronger. And for his long-term future, for him doing what he did for the program and coming back, obviously, like, that they can't then just run him ragged. It's not going to happen.
I just think that there's a direct correlation between how much point guard depth emerges, whether it's Watts or whether it's Lawyer, and how fast and aggressively Michigan State can run through the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
Or Winston. Maybe Winston's just everything they did to strengthen his legs pays off and he can just go, right? I mean, if he's not battling tendonitis all year, what kind of player could he be, right? It could be a whole different upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, he played 83% of available minutes last year, which...
What did he play in the Big Ten?
Good question.
Probably much higher.
86.7%. So he ranked 9th in the conference in percentage of minutes played, which I actually would have guessed would have been higher than that. Now, they ran a couple teams off the floor last year.
And those numbers shot up as the year went on, right? Like Langford was still there in some of those early Big Ten games, like the 2 in
right, but like
December.
Going from March 9th on, so that was the first Michigan game. He played 43 minutes, 41 minutes, 36 minutes, 29, 28, 29. Those were in the NCAA tournament. And then 30 against LSU, 31 against... Oh, wait, these are wrong. That's not right. Sorry. So from the Michigan game, it was 32 minutes, 22, 28. Is this right? Yeah.
A lot of high 30s in there. I don't know. No one's following all those numbers you're rattling off. But I heard some 40s, which says everything you need to know.
Well, 40 in the national semifinals, 40 in the Sweet 16, 39, or I'm sorry, 40 in the Elite 8, 39 in the Sweet 16.
So every minute of every game, basically.
Yeah. It didn't help that he had to play 39 minutes against Bradley because they played like shit that day.
When the game was in the balance,
right.
Winston was always on the court last year.
For sure, as he should be.
So he's going to be again, and how much can you run if you have a point guard playing that heavy minutes? That's the question. Comes down to his health or the depth behind him, I think.
I will agree with that. I will be curious to see how much more they do run and what it looks like. But can we talk about turnovers? Because if you're going to talk about getting more shots up per game, running more is not the answer. Turning the ball over less is the answer.
Yeah. I just don't think that's what...
ridiculous. The number. They turned the ball over 19% of the time in conference games last year. 19% of your percentages. With the best point guard in the country. It has always been inexplicable.
It's part of how they play.
I understand that it's the style of play. Kind of, this is just a give and take with it. But a lot of the turnovers are unforced. And a lot of it does start with Cassius Winston, for as good as he is. He averaged 2.6 turnovers per game in 32 wins. He averaged 4.5 turnovers in their 7 losses, including the 9 at Illinois. He needs to be better with the ball. He needs to turn it over less. I think that he should... One of his goals should be to lead the country in assist-to-turnover ratio. If you look at the numbers last year, you'll see him. I think he was like... I don't even know if he was top 5 in the league in turnover or assist-to-turnover ratio. So that should be number one goal. But if you cut out some... If they went... I would like to see the numbers. If their turnover percentage was lower, they probably would have set records in the Ken Pom era for offensive efficiency last year. They were ranked number 1 in the country in offensive efficiency while ranking 211th in the country in turnover percentage. That's that's freaking impossible.
So maybe part of the reason they're able to get such efficient, or they're able to score so efficiently, has to do with the fact that they're aggressive and they do X, Y, and Z. It's people have been yelling about Michigan State turning the ball over all the time since Ken Pom's website existed, and you could see those turnover rate numbers on there, right? It's just part of, I think it just comes down to how they play, and if you want to be as aggressive as they play, it's going to be part of the bargain. I can Winston improve? Yes, but it's not like they're going to all of a sudden be top 25 in turnover rate. I don't think that's realistic.
Need to be above,
I think it's.
I'm sorry, and they were 175, not 211 last year. It is. I just think it is the most obvious room for improvement.
Yes, as long as you don't give up something else.
Sure. But like teams can play fast and not turn the ball over. It's not unheard of.
It's not, but it's obviously something of what's going on in East Lansing because year after year after year, they're in the middle to lower.
North Carolina ranked 84th in the country in turnover percentage. Like that is a little bit more reasonable. It's 100 spots higher than Michigan State. Like that should be the goal.
But if you look at the distribution, how far apart is 170th from 100th or 83rd, right? Like there's some teams, a lot of the teams that lead the country in turnover rate play very slowly, and they really, really emphasize it, right? There's also a big gap of teams that turn the ball over somewhere between like 17 and 20%. And it looks bad, but I don't know if that's changing the whole picture.
That's fair.
Could you make a modest improvement? Yeah, and they probably will. Winston will be a senior. He'll get better with the ball. Maybe he won't be as tired all the time, and he'll make some of the mistakes were just. I honestly think a lot of Michigan State's turnover, you just see they're going too fast, and they're trying to put that pressure on the other team. But you can't put that pressure on the other team if you're not going that fast, so it's just part of the gimmick, I think. Not gimmick, that's a bad word, but part of the bargain.
Agreed. Okay. Anything else you want to touch on? Do you have any questions or anything like that from what you read in that thing or anything you want to touch on here?
No, I think we hit on the big picture.
Sure.
State of the program as of August.
Yeah. Agreed. And, the last thing on Winston and his knees of note was Izzo saying that they were, quote, 200% better. So that sounds good. Certainly music to Michigan State fans' ears, I'd imagine. So we're going to leave you with that. For much more on this, I would encourage you to hop over to The Athletic, read the 4,800 words that I diligently wrote on the state of the Michigan State program. There's some quotes there from Izzo and Cassius Winston as well to check out. Appreciate you reading it and leave your feedback if you so choose. But be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Leave a review and a rating for us. Subscribe to umhoops.com. Subscribe to The Athletic. And that'll do it. Dylan, you want to say goodbye?
Oh, yeah. See you guys next week. We don't know what we're going to talk about next, but we'll figure something out. And, yeah.
Be sure to tip your bartenders and your servers.